It wasn't the numbers that shocked me. It wasn't even the timing. It was the handwriting. That familiar curve of an M in melody. Clear your desk by 5. No signature, no explanation. Just a sticky note, pale yellow, trembling slightly under the AC breeze, pressed onto the top right corner of my laptop. Next to it sat a contract worth $950 million. 11 months of late nights, legal rewrites, and back-channel negotiations condensed into one stack of paper. And now, a post-it note told me I didn't belong at the table anymore. I blinked once, then again. The world didn't move. Around me, the final preparations for the deal continued. Suits rustled, pens clicked, glasses clinked in the corner, waiting for a post-signature toast that I was apparently no longer invited to. The Zintrex team sat poised and ready, unaware of the internal politics unraveling beside them. I stood there, frozen, like a portrait in the wrong gallery. Jared Vaughn, our new interim CEO, wasn't even in the room. Of course he wasn't. He hadn't attended a single strategic meeting in person, but he knew exactly when to leave a note. Just vague enough to avoid HR. Just cruel enough to make a point. And the worst part? No one said a word. I looked around the room. People I had trained, coached, even covered for, suddenly busy adjusting their cuffs, checking their phones, rereading papers they'd already memorized. Eyes dropped, faces stiffened. Not one person met my gaze. In that moment, I wasn't just fired, I was abandoned. But they had all forgotten one thing. The system Zintrex was buying, the very framework driving this deal, had my fingerprints in every clause, every condition, every hidden dependency, and not just conceptually. I built it, not for them, not on company servers, and definitely not under their legal umbrella. I reached for the contract. The paper felt heavier than usual, like it knew what I was about to do. I flipped to the final page. The signature block waited, empty and patient. My name wasn't supposed to be there, but I still had the pen, and they still needed my hand. 6 months before the note, before the silence, before the betrayal, there was only hope. It started with an email subject line, Zintrex Initiative, Internal Lead Nomination. My name was bolded in the first line of the message. I had to read it twice. After 10 years in the trenches of corporate infrastructure, I wasn't used to my efforts being recognized so directly. The assignment? Lead architect on Galvix's most complex acquisition to date, a $950 million merger with Zintrex Holdings, a global logistics tech giant. I was to build the architecture that would hold the entire cross-border framework together. Regulatory compliance, tax structure, IP transition. It would be, they said, the defining work of my career, and I believed them. The next morning, I met with Meera Patel, a junior strategist who'd worked under me for almost 2 years, bright, intuitive, and unshakably loyal. When I told her I'd requested her to be my right hand on the project, she actually gasped. "You're serious," she said, eyes wide behind round glasses. "As a heart attack," I grinned. "But you're not sleeping much for the next few months." "Worth it," she said without hesitation. That night, I called my mother. "Mom, I can't make it out to Denver next weekend," I told her, gently. "Galvix just gave me the lead on something big. Global big." She was quiet for a moment. Then came her voice, warm, worn with pride and distance. "I miss you, Mel. You've been chasing this your whole life. Just promise me when it's done. You'll come home." I smiled into the receiver. "I will. Once I finish this project, I'll come home. I promise." The first 6 weeks were a whirlwind of whiteboards, drafts, diagrams, and impossible meetings. I built system blueprints by day, then polished them at night on my personal laptop, mostly because Galvix's secure system wasn't secure enough for my standards. Meera brought me coffee so often. The barista near our office memorized both our orders. But something was off. Jared Vaughn, our new interim CEO, had yet to sit in on a single design session. Budgets were being realigned, and behind the glass walls of executive conference rooms, conversations fell silent when I walked by. One Friday evening, Mira looked up from her screen. "Hey, you trust him?" she asked cautiously. "Trust who?" "Jared." I didn't answer, just clicked Save As on my file and typed a new name into the box. Thorn Framework Jofter V1. That weekend, I registered an LLC, Thorn Parallel Group. Camille, an old law school roommate turned corporate attorney, helped me set it up. Freelance consulting firm. I told her, "You planning to moonlight?" "Just planning," I said. I never meant to use it. I never thought I'd need to. But something inside me whispered, "Build your own vault, just in case they try to lock you out of theirs." By the end of week 8, the bones of the system were complete. Mira had grown into her role faster than I expected, and I still believed in the project, in the future, in the promise of recognition. What I didn't know yet was that hope, unchecked, can turn into the perfect trap. They thought I was just building a system. They didn't realize I was building a shield. The framework had become more than a set of diagrams. It had grown into something alive, agile, modular, and elegant, each segment of the infrastructure connected to the next like vertebrae in a spine, supporting layers of legal protocols, licensing channels, and operational redundancies that could survive in multiple regulatory environments. It was mine. My mind, my rules, my structure. And yet, it wore Galvix's badge. I didn't hate the company, not yet, but I didn't trust it either. By week 9, my unease had solidified into something unshakable. Jared Vaughn, who had barely been visible during the early stages, was now dropping cryptic comments in exec briefings. "We need to think long-term. Legacy roles are being reassessed." And once, with a thin smile, "No one is irreplaceable." He never said my name. He didn't need to. So I made a decision, not one born of spite, but survival. Camille met me at a quiet cafe off 3rd Street, across from the city library. Her dark hair was pulled into a low knot, and she wore that subtle lawyer's look. Neutral blouse, perfect posture, eyes always scanning. "You're not leaving Galvix, are you?" she asked, before I even sat down. "No," I said. "I'm staying, but I need a firewall." Camille didn't ask questions. She pulled out her laptop and began typing. "Name of the holding entity?" "Thorn Parallel Group." She paused. "That's very... you." I smiled faintly. "It sounds like something off a circuit board, right?" Within the hour, the LLC was real, legally registered, tax compliant, and airtight, on paper. It was just a boutique systems consultancy, nothing special, but in practice. It now owned the skeleton of the system I had built. The first full version of the infrastructure blueprint was logged, time-stamped, and licensed to Thorn. Galvix still had access to my work. But now, I had a legal foundation to stand on, back at the office. I resumed work like nothing had changed. Mira kept pushing code with me late into the evenings, joking that I was teaching her to be a ninja architect. She never asked why I occasionally saved versions of our work to a secure drive that wasn't company-linked. She trusted me. I didn't take that lightly. By the end of week 10, we began embedding the system into the early drafts of the Zintrex contract. It was Camille's idea to include a non-disruptive clause listing authorized infrastructure integrators. Buried on page 84 of the technical appendix, Thorn Parallel Group was third in the list. Between 2 dummy shell firms, no one questioned it, no one noticed. I reread that page 3 times before handing it off to legal. I wasn't doing this to undermine anyone. I wasn't planning a mutiny. I just didn't want to be caught unarmed in a boardroom knife fight. The pride didn't come from owning the system. It came from knowing I had designed it well enough to defend, and quiet enough to protect the people who built it with me. Mira was thriving. She'd just pitched a module refinement that shaved deployment lag by 17%. And it was her first time getting direct praise from Galvix's engineering director. I watched her eyes light up in that meeting and remembered what that had once felt like, before power became more important than partnership. Camille texted me one night, "If this thing ever burns down, you're walking out with the blueprints, and your name's still clean." I didn't reply, but I looked at the system again, each line of logic, each contingency protocol, and I felt something quiet settle in my chest. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was protection, designed not to fight back, but to survive the fire. The first time I met Jared Vaughn, he was wearing a jacket that cost more than my rent, slick gray wool, slim cut, no tie, just confidence, the expensive kind. He shook my hand without looking me in the eye and said, "I've heard good things. Melody, hope you're ready to adapt." He didn't smile, and I didn't feel welcome. Jared was brought in as interim CEO after Charles Lynn. The man who had built Galvix from the ground up resigned under personal pressures that didn't sound very personal at all. Charles had mentored me. He saw value in people, not just numbers. Jared, by contrast, seemed to view people as temporary contracts. From his first week, things began to change, quietly, calculated. Legacy managers reassigned. Project leads swapped out for fresh hires with questionable credentials. Charles's old team started disappearing one by one, either pushed out or politely reassigned to departments they'd never worked in before. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that people were just moving on. But when Mira whispered to me, "They just reassigned Mark to a compliance project in Miami, without telling him," I felt something cold settle in my gut. Then it was my turn. In our bi-weekly strategy meeting, Jared took the head seat and interrupted me halfway through a sentence. "Let's skip the deep tech dive. Melody, we're trying to keep this high level. Executives don't need engineering lessons." The room fell silent. I glanced at the other team members, looking for a flicker of support. One pair of eyes met mine. Olivia Tran, our senior financial analyst. We'd worked side by side for 4 years. She once stayed with me in the hospital waiting room when my mother had surgery. Now? She looked down and pretended to write something. I finished my sentence, lips tight, after the meeting. I sat in my office, staring at the clause, the one Camille had helped me bury inside the Zintrex contract. Authorized infrastructure integrators include Thorn Parallel Group. I hovered my cursor over it. I considered deleting it. I didn't want war. I wasn't planning betrayal. I just wanted to do the job right, be part of something bigger, something real. But that meeting, the interruption, the humiliation, the silence of people who once had my back, cracked something inside me. I closed the window. The clause stayed. Later that week, Jared rolled out a new performance review initiative. Realignment reviews. They called them, but only those associated with Charles Lynn's tenure were being reviewed. I was told mine would happen in 2 weeks, led by a new VP I had never met. Mira caught up with me as I left the building. "Are they trying to force you out?" I didn't answer. She didn't push, but I knew the answer. At home, I couldn't sleep. I sat on my balcony with a glass of white wine and reread the email from legal confirming the Thorn clause had been accepted without question. My thumb hovered over Camille's name in my contacts. I almost called. Instead, I wrote a new line in my notebook. "Don't delete anything you might need later." The next morning, Olivia walked past me in the hallway, for a moment. I thought she was going to stop, to say sorry, or even just offer a smile, but she walked by like we'd never shared years of collaboration. Crises and inside jokes. The wind had shifted, and I knew it. I wasn't just being pushed aside. I was being erased, politely, but deliberately. And the people I thought I could rely on, they were already gone, just waiting for the paperwork to catch up. By week 11, the silence was no longer an oversight, it was a strategy. My emails were taking longer to reach their recipients. Shared folders I had full access to suddenly required new permissions. Calendar invites for project syncs began arriving without my name attached. At first, I blamed the system, IT glitches, administrative mistakes. I even submitted a support ticket, only to be told, curtly, "Your access appears normal from our side." It wasn't. I sat in the Monday Leadership Sync, now oddly renamed Program Pulse, and realized I was the only one without printed materials in front of me. Mira leaned in, whispering, "They sent it to the internal list this morning." "I'm still on that list." Mira gave me a soft look and didn't say anything. I began to notice the way people navigated around me. Eye contact was brief or avoided altogether. Conversations paused when I entered a room, and never quite resumed. Olivia, who had once walked with me to lunch every Wednesday like clockwork, now took the elevator early or late, but never with me. Even my desk felt different. I'd come in and find pens slightly out of place, documents rearranged, like someone was subtly testing how much I still paid attention. I told myself I was imagining it. I wanted to believe that. But then came HR. I'd sent an email requesting clarification on my performance review, something I'd previously been commended for leading. 2 days passed. Then 5. No response. I followed up twice more. Still silence. On Friday morning, I walked to the HR office myself. Janelle, who had known me for 6 years, barely looked up. "It's in progress," she said, already turning back to her screen. "I just need to know who's assigned. You'll receive a calendar invite if needed. That's all I have." "Melody?" I stood there for a moment, then walked away. That evening, I sat alone in the quiet of the 17th floor lounge, where no one really went after 6. The skyline was pale and ghostly, twilight painting the glass in washed-out blues. I stared out at it, wondering when exactly I had gone from valued to invisible. Was it me? Had I misread something? Was I too cautious, too controlling, too difficult? My phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. No name. No context. Just one line. "Be careful! They're waiting for you to slip so they can cut you from the deal." My stomach turned. I stared at the message for a full minute. No follow-up, no typing bubble, just silence. I looked around the office, but the floor was empty. Only the cleaning staff roamed like ghosts in the distance. I texted back, "Who is this?" No answer. I scanned the past few weeks in my head. Could it have been Mira? She was the only one who still showed me genuine concern, or at least tried. Maybe it was one of the new hires, or even one of the interns. There was a girl, quiet, observant, who always lingered near my end of the table during cross-functional meetings. I never learned her name, but I remembered how she once stared at me when Jared cut me off in that strategy meeting. It wasn't pity in her eyes. It was recognition. I walked back to my desk. It was nearly 8. The office was nearly dark. I sat down and opened the contract folder again. My hands moved automatically. Page 84. Technical Appendix. Authorized Infrastructure Integrators. There it was. Thorn Parallel Group. Still intact. Still hidden in plain sight. I leaned back in my chair. The soft hum of fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above. 1,000 doubts raced through me, but one stubborn instinct refused to die. If they were waiting for me to fall, I wouldn't. Not quietly. Not without remembering who built the system they're standing on. It happened on a Thursday night. The day had ended like so many others, in silence. People walked by without speaking, as if I were a fixture instead of a colleague. I stayed late, hoping to get a head start on system validation logs before the final handover to Zintrex. When I opened my laptop, the first warning appeared. Access denied. Please contact your administrator. I frowned, refreshed the page, and tried again. Same result. I logged into a backup directory. Permission revoked. My pulse picked up. I restarted the VPN, checked my credentials, even ran diagnostics from a clean device. Still nothing. I called IT, no answer. Called again. Voicemail. I messaged Mira. Are your credentials working? 3 dots. Then her reply. Yeah, all fine. Why? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. They'd locked me out. Not just sidelined, not just ignored, cut off, for a moment. I sat completely still in the fluorescent-lit quiet of the 17th floor. Then I stood. I walked the perimeter of the floor, a loop I'd done hundreds of times in high heels and headset meetings. But this time, I didn't see my team. I saw ghosts, empty chairs, turned backs, framed plaques on walls with names I once respected, many now gone. I pressed the elevator button with more force than necessary, rode down to the lobby, and stepped out into the night air like it might give me a reason not to scream. I pulled out my phone and dialed Camille. She picked up on the second ring. Mel? They locked me out. Pause. They what? They cut off my access. No warning, not even a formal notice. I'm out of the system. I heard Camille inhale sharply, then the sound of keys clacking on her keyboard. Well, that's interesting. What? They just sent us something 15 minutes ago. Who? Zintrex. Another pause. It's a final stage verification request. They want confirmation that Thorn Parallel Group is the licensed integrator for the infrastructure system. I blinked. They think we're running the system? No, Camille said. They don't think. They know. They're just covering their legal bases now. You're still listed as primary architect. They just didn't realize how much of the licensing pipeline you owned through Thorn. A bitter laugh caught in my throat. So they iced me out thinking they'd already absorbed my work. And didn't realize, Camille finished, that you were never working under their terms. I hung up and leaned against the cold brick wall outside the Galvix Tower, headlights streaking across the wet pavement. Something inside me, something fragile, cracked clean through. I had given them everything. A decade of loyalty, missed holidays, late-night deliverables. I had covered for their chaos, solved their blind spots, and trained the very people now ignoring me in the hallways. And now I was just deleted. No meeting, no reason, just silence, and system revocation. I thought of Olivia, of Mark in Miami, of all the faces that once smiled, now hollow. And I thought of Jared Vaughn, the way he hadn't even looked at me the day of the strategy meeting, the way he had spoken to me like I was no longer in the room, even while I was still breathing in it. He didn't just want me gone. He wanted me forgotten. I walked back inside, straight to my desk, took my personal drive out of the locked drawer, and copied the last clean build of the infrastructure framework. Not to use, not to leak, just to protect, if they wanted to burn the house down. I was at least going to walk out with the original blueprint. I packed lightly, just the essentials, my laptop, that drive, and the notebook where I'd quietly logged every move since the first shift in the wind. Then I opened a browser and booked a flight. Pendley Hotel, Monday, Zintrex final signing. I was going to be there, not because they asked, but because I was the only person who knew what they were actually buying. By the time I stepped into the Pendley Hotel lobby, my breath was as steady as my steps. But make no mistake, I was burning. The kind of fire that doesn't explode, the kind that simmers, controlled, patient, strategic. It was 3:15 sharp. The final signing for the Zintrex acquisition was scheduled for 3:30. And everything about the room, the cold marble floors, the quiet hum of filtered air, the floral centerpiece on the conference table, screamed celebration, except for the fact that no one looked directly at me. Mira was there, seated near the end of the table, flipping nervously through briefing materials. Her gaze brushed over me, but she looked away too quickly, across the room. Olivia adjusted a stack of folders, pretending to read. A junior associate I didn't recognize whispered something into her ear. They both chuckled, a sound too forced, too loud, a script for appearances. No Jared Vaughn. Of course not. He was never one to face discomfort head-on. He'd send someone else to collect credit, or deliver a knife. I walked calmly past them all, heels soft against the hotel carpet. No greetings, no acknowledgement, just me and the silence they wore like armor. And yet, no one stopped me, not even the senior counsel from Zintrex, Daniel Crane, who looked up with vague recognition and offered a tight smile. "Melody," he said. "Didn't expect to see you here." I smiled back, not wide, not warm. "Thought I'd witness the finale." He nodded once, perhaps sensing more than I let on. At 3:21. The pre-signing brief began. Galvic's legal team skimmed through the structure. Mira presented the handover protocol she and I had rehearsed so many times we could recite it in our sleep. Only now. She avoided eye contact completely. As she spoke, I leaned slightly forward and scanned the contract packet beside her. My eyes found it immediately. Page 84. Technical Appendix. Authorized Infrastructure Integrators. 1. Redacted. 2. Redacted. 3. Thorn Parallel Group, LLC. Still there, still untouched, buried like a trigger, silent, inert, until someone noticed. Which no one had. They didn't realize what they were holding. The engine of the entire deal, the infrastructure blueprint, and the only entity legally allowed to validate its integration was me. I waited. At 3:25, the contract packets were handed out. At 3:26, the Galvic's attorney asked, "Are we ready for execution?" The Zintrex side nodded. My fingers moved before my voice did. "Calm. Certain." I took a pen from the table, uncapped it, and flipped the packet open in front of me. Mira paused mid-sentence. Olivia froze slightly in her seat. Even Daniel leaned forward as I reached page 86, the signature block. No one spoke. No one stopped me. Because no one really understood what I was doing. Because I was already supposed to be gone. I hovered the pen just above the line. The silence in the room was dense, artificial, as though sound had been pushed out by tension. This wasn't revenge. Not yet. This was reclamation. Of dignity. Of authorship. Of every late night, every red line, every version of this system they had quietly tried to make theirs. And still, I said nothing, because that would have been too easy for them. Let them keep guessing. I signed. One motion, clean, unshaking. When I handed the packet to Zintrex's legal team, no one asked whose name I'd written. No one checked the entity line at the bottom. The Galvic staff clapped politely, as if they'd just finalized a deal they fully understood. But they hadn't, because they didn't know what they'd just let walk out the door. It's strange how quiet victory can be. No trumpets, no confetti, no raised voices or fists in the air, just the sound of a pen sliding across paper, and a decision that would change everything, permanently. As I sat at the long table in the Penley Hotel conference room, beneath chandeliers that hummed softly above polished glasses and muted applause, I flipped through the contract packet in front of me, each page crisp and thick, each clause polished by hours of legal labor. The illusion of order. But I wasn't here for ceremony. I was here to correct the record. Across the table, Mira gave her final notes, reading aloud the handover procedures like it hadn't all been built between our caffeine-fueled nights. I could still see the smudge of ink on her finger, a telltale sign she'd been marking edits until the last minute. She didn't look at me. She hadn't for days. To my right, Olivia shifted in her chair, clearly sensing tension but unwilling to name it. She hadn't spoken a word to me since the realignment meeting where Jared undermined me in front of the board. Her silence then hurt more than Jared's dismissal. But today, I wasn't asking for anyone to speak up. The legal packets had been distributed. All signatures except one had been placed. And mine was the last line waiting. I flipped to the back. Page 86. The signature page. I studied the block of text at the bottom. Execution entity, Galvix Corporation. Staring back at me like a lie printed in Times New Roman. It didn't belong. Not anymore. Not after they'd erased my name from every thread, every directory, every meeting room they once begged me to fill with ideas. I reached into my folio and removed a different signature page, one that looked identical to the others. Same formatting, same language, except for one correction. Execution entity, Thorn Parallel Group, LLC. It had already been vetted, already backed by the underlying architecture, the licensing keys, the deployment hooks, the modular encryption triggers, all led back to Thorn, not Galvix, not Jared, me, and they hadn't even noticed. I slid the new page seamlessly into the packet. At that moment, Mira glanced up, her eyes met mine. Just briefly, she knew, but she said nothing, in a way. I appreciated that more than confrontation. She wasn't loyal to me anymore, not actively, but something in her had decided not to get in the way. I picked up the pen, and then I stood. Zintrex's legal liaison, Daniel Crane, was reviewing compliance logs by the far wall. He didn't expect me to approach, which is why he blinked in surprise when I handed him a small silver USB. "This is the final framework package," I said, my voice calm and low. He raised an eyebrow. "From Galvix?" "From me," I corrected. "The working version, pre-deployment build, source-mapped and fully licensed. The other version won't function without the integration key, and only one entity holds that key." His expression sharpened. "You're saying Galvix can't activate it? They can't even explain it." A pause, then, "But you can?" He didn't argue, just nodded, tucked the USB into his folder, and walked off to inform his counsel, back at the table. The packet sat quietly. Innocent, legal, lethal. I opened it once more and looked at the signature line. Then, with a steady hand, I signed. It wasn't vengeance. Not really. It was reclamation. For the weeks of silence. For the people who turned their backs. For the meetings I led but was never invited to afterward. For being used, then discarded. And most of all, for the system they never truly understood. Because if they had, they would have known not to leave me with the pen. I reached into my blazer pocket one last time. Inside was the silver ring I'd worn since the day I was named lead architect. A personal token I'd bought quietly. Not flashy, just a reminder of who I was at the beginning. I slipped it off my finger and placed it on the table, right where Jared Vaughn's name should have gone. No one stopped me. No one knew what to say. That was the beauty of operating in silence. They never saw it coming. As I walked out of the Pendley Hotel, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. By the time they realized what I had done, the ink would be dry, the contracts irreversible, and Thorn Parallel Group would be the only legal gatekeeper to the $950 million infrastructure they thought they had absorbed. They didn't absorb anything. They just signed it over. At 8:02 in the morning, the first email hit. Subject line: Zintrex finalizes historic merger with Thorn Parallel Group. 900 deal confirmed by 8:03. Galvix's internal messaging system exploded. What is this? Was that a typo? Did legal approve this wording? Who the hell is Thorn? By 8:04, someone forwarded the press release to Jared Vaughn's executive inbox. He didn't open it, not immediately. He was still at home, 3 sugars in his coffee, morning playlist humming, fully expecting a morning of headlines positioning him as a deal-making genius. His assistant, Claire, buzzed him mid-sip. "Jared, you need to read this. Now." He clicked it, read the title, paused, read it again, then scrolled, slowly. As if disbelief might delay reality, there it was. In bold beneath the headline, Thorn Parallel Group, LLC will serve as the exclusive integrator and system architect for all cross-jurisdictional infrastructure as outlined in the final agreement signed at Pendley Hotel on Monday. No mention of Galvix, no Jared Vaughn, no legacy, just Thorn, and a contract that had already been registered, validated, and time-stamped, filed through Camille's legal team 72 hours earlier, back at the Galvix office. Chaos was a quiet thing at first, emails flying, voices rising behind frosted glass, but it took less than 20 minutes for the full storm to hit. Legal scrambled to pull the original contract. The problem? The signed packet at Pendley had already been submitted to both the SEC and international compliance partners. There was no edit, no reversal, no second version. Camille had made sure of that. At 8:15, Mira sat frozen in front of her screen. The legal email chain had reached 56 messages and counting. Someone used the phrase irreversible execution, and she quietly got up from her desk to avoid the inevitable fallout. She didn't go far, just to the quiet corner conference room where she had seen Melody sit so many times in silence. She pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long moment. Then, without unlocking it, she set it face down on the table. Jared was on the phone by 8:22. "To be clear, Daniel, this is not the agreement I authorized. This is not what was approved by my team." Daniel Crane, Zintrex's senior legal liaison, remained calm. "We have the execution copy. It matches the framework submitted in the legal appendix. Page 84 lists Thorn Parallel Group. It's been there for months. I want to know who signed that clause in." "I believe you already do." Silence. Jared stood by his window, knuckles white around the edge of the sill. Outside, the skyline mocked him. A bright, clear day. Headlines printing faster than he could deny them, in a nearby co-working space across town. Melody sat in a corner booth, coffee untouched. She watched the news alerts roll in one by one. Her name wasn't in the headlines either. That was by design. Camille had advised against it. "Let the company name carry the weight," she'd said. "You can keep your name for the next move." Melody had agreed. This wasn't about ego. It was about clarity. Galvix thought removing her would remove the system. Instead, they removed their only connection to it. At 8:30, Jared called an emergency executive meeting. People showed up half-dressed, half-informed, and wholly panicked. The VP of Finance asked if this was a hack. The director of PR wondered if the firm had signed a duplicate deal by mistake. No one had answers, because the only person who could explain how Thorn became the execution entity had already left the building by 8:45. The IT department confirmed that Melody's access credentials were still blocked. Her account had not been active in over 48 hours. Yet somehow, she had signed the deal. Jared slammed his fist onto the table. "I want every copy, every file, every record of who touched this clause." They searched for his name in the submission packet. Once, twice, 3 times, nothing. Jared Vaughn, self-declared architect of the Galvix-Zintrex merger, did not exist in the final documentation, somewhere far from the noise. Melody finally sipped her coffee. Lukewarm now, but satisfying. She glanced once more at the press release on her phone, then closed the screen. They had erased her, and in doing so, signed away the one thing they couldn't fake: authorship. It took 24 hours for Galvix to start bleeding. Not publicly, not at first, internally. It began with emails that felt more like fire alarms. Department heads pinged legal. Legal pinged IT. It said nothing had been breached, because nothing had been hacked. And yet, somehow, the $950 million deal they'd been celebrating was now being credited to a company most of them had never even heard of. Thorn Parallel Group. By the next morning, the stock had dropped 6%, and by 11:02, Jared Vaughn was out. The board didn't even meet in person. The call lasted 9 minutes. The wording of the announcement was sterile. Mr. Vaughn has stepped down to pursue new opportunities. But inside the building, no one needed interpretation. He had been erased, just as he tried to erase her. Melody didn't celebrate. She sat in the quiet booth of a co-working cafe 2 blocks from Galvic's headquarters, watching the fallout unfold on her laptop. The headlines were cautious, then curious, by noon. They were naming her, not directly, but between the lines. Industry insider quietly transfers ownership rights mid-merger. Galvic's caught off guard. How one line in a contract turned a tech titan into an outsider. The deal Galvix signed but never understood. Camille messaged her with a screenshot from one article and a simple text. Clean. You're everywhere. Without being anywhere. Melody replied with a single emoji. A chess piece. The Queen. In Galvic's legal department, the mood was brutal. An emergency audit found no violations, no unauthorized actions, no trace of internal sabotage. The metadata matched Thorne's filings. The clause listing Thorne as integrator had been signed months earlier, during a version review that had passed through 4 separate hands. One of the paralegals, new to the firm, whispered. It was like she laid the fuse before they even knew there was fire. Another replied, She didn't lay it. She built the whole damn matchbox. They searched for grounds to challenge the transfer, but there was nothing. Melody had committed no breach. She'd simply let them walk into a structure they never cared to read. By early afternoon, Jared's office was cleared out. The assistant who once filtered his every move now locked the door without a word. Some on the executive team celebrated his fall behind closed doors, but most of them knew they were next. Finger-pointing erupted in every floor briefing. Legal blamed strategy for missing the clause. Said, strategy accused engineering of not protecting proprietary infrastructure. Engineering fired back that legal had signed off on every line. Meanwhile, HR floated quietly between departments, trying to identify when exactly Melody had been off-boarded and who had approved it. No one had an answer. That night, Melody received a message, not from Camille, not from legal, from Olivia Tran, a name that carried more history than heat now. I should have spoken up in that meeting. I knew what was happening. I froze. I kept thinking, say something. But I didn't. I didn't have the courage. I didn't have the courage to stand up for you. I'm sorry. Melody sat still for a long moment, rereading the message. It wasn't bitterness that rose. Not exactly. It was something quieter, like grief. Not because Olivia had betrayed her, but because she'd been one of the few Melody had silently hoped would stand. The satisfaction was real. She had outplayed them all. But the cost? It wasn't numbers or reputations. It was the realization that loyalty, the kind she once gave freely, rarely survived ambition. She had secured the win and lost the team. She typed back, I understand. I just wish it hadn't taken this for you to remember who I was. Then she deleted it, closed her phone, and let the silence settle. There was no applause on the rooftop, no boardroom claps, no ceremonial toasts, just wind brushing softly across steel railings. The low pulse of the Seattle skyline below, and 2 women who knew exactly what they'd done and why they didn't need anyone's recognition for it. Melody stood at the edge of the rooftop terrace, arms resting lightly on the railing, wine glass warming in her hand. The air was crisp, laced with hints of sea salt and spring jasmine. Across the rooftop, Camille was barefoot now, having kicked off her heels 10 minutes after they arrived. Did it feel the way you thought it would? Camille asked as she joined Melody at the edge, her voice low and unhurried. Melody took a sip before answering. No, she said honestly. It felt quieter. Camille nodded. The clean winds always do. They had taken the top floor of a boutique hotel in Belltown, not for celebration, but to decompress. No press was invited, no selfies, just a bottle of red from Camille's private stash, and 2 hours of undisturbed silence. And for the first time in months, Melody could breathe. So, Camille said, I spoke with Zintrex. Melody turned her head slowly, amused. That didn't take long. They've been watching from the start, Camille replied. They knew the system had your fingerprints all over it. They just didn't expect you to own it so surgically. Melody raised an eyebrow. They want to make you Chief Strategy Officer. Camille continued. Direct report to the CEO. Full operational freedom. Global team. Equity options. Melody didn't answer right away. She let the city breathe beneath her. Let her muscles ease into the cool metal of the railing. It would be so easy to say yes, to step into the role Galvix had always promised. Only now with leverage, power, recognition. But something inside her resisted. Camille, she said finally, I'm not looking for another tower to climb. I just want space to build something that isn't owned the second it's finished. Camille tilted her head. So you're saying no? I'm saying, Melody said, turning to face her fully. If they're serious, let's make it a partnership. Thorne stays independent. I stay outside. They bring the vision. I architect the systems. On a contract basis. They get agility. I get autonomy. Camille smiled. I'll draft it tonight. Later. After Camille returned a call from a Zintrex board member downstairs, Melody remained alone on the terrace. The city was wide and flickering, alive but not urgent, for the first time in a long while. It wasn't waiting for her to catch up. She pulled out her phone and opened the same contact she had been staring at for weeks. Mom. There had been no fight, no cold silence, just the slow erosion of time, long nights at the office, unanswered texts, missed calls filled with gentle, disappointed warmth. She tapped the screen and held it to her ear. It rang once, twice, then. Hello? Her mother's voice was soft, textured with surprise. Melody closed her eyes and let the sound settle. It's me, she said. I should have called sooner. A pause, then. I'm just glad you're calling now. Melody felt her throat tighten. I finished something big, something important, but I realized it didn't matter unless I could share it with you. They talked about small things. The garden, the rain, her mother's new obsession with fermented garlic. No talk of contracts, no mention of Jared, just warmth, just voice. Before hanging up, Melody whispered, Thank you for not giving up on me. Her mother answered simply, Never. When the call ended, Melody stood alone in the silence, a different kind of silence now, not the weapon they used against her in the halls of Galvix, but something lighter, something earned. She looked out at the skyline and took a deep breath. She had no deadlines, no decks to revise, no metrics to defend, only options, only space, only the sound of her own thoughts, unfiltered, unjudged, and finally, free, freedom. It turned out, wasn't a door kicked open, it was a rooftop, a glass of wine, and the absence of apology. Some people think power is loud, that it comes in the form of a raised voice, a slammed door, a final confrontation in a crowded conference room. They imagine retaliation as explosive, operatic, something that echoes in the halls and makes people flinch. But Melody had learned something else. Real power? It doesn't shout, it signs. 3 days after the rooftop meeting in Seattle, She returned to her apartment. It was smaller than anything she could now afford, but it still smelled like lavender oil and fresh ink, two things she'd always used to stay grounded. Her plants had survived the chaos. Her books waited on the shelf, untouched but familiar. She poured herself tea, not wine this time. Then she opened her laptop. Her inbox was a flood of the expected. Follow-ups from Zintrex Legal, NDAs from media groups hoping for a statement. At least a dozen congratulations from old contacts pretending they'd always believed in her. But one email stood out. No subject line, no signature, just a single sentence. Thank you. You made me believe I could finally stand up, too. She stared at it for a long time. No name, no context, no follow-up. But it hit harder than any of the headlines. Somewhere inside Galvix, or maybe Zintrex, or one of the countless tech firms that had watched this unfold, someone had been paying attention. Someone who had seen her pushed aside, ignored, undermined, and who'd thought, that's just how the game works, until Melody showed them another way. She closed the laptop slowly, hands relaxed, not clenched, not with fury, with closure. This wasn't vengeance. It wasn't even redemption. It was a redefinition. She thought back to that day in the Pendley Hotel. How no one made eye contact. How Jared never showed. How the silence in the room had been so thick it nearly convinced her she didn't exist. But she had. And when they thought she was gone, she rewrote the story. No shouting. No threats. Just one final page. And a pen in the right hand. In the end. They didn't remember her because she screamed. They remembered her because she didn't have to. Because when the system came crashing down, all the pieces still pointed to the same architecture. Hers. The clauses, the structure, the licensing, the blueprint of the deal that had made them all millionaires or ruined their careers. She had built it. And when they tried to erase her, they'd only deleted their own access. Camille called later that afternoon. They're still unraveling Jared's decisions, she said. But it doesn't really matter now. Zintrex signed the revised partnership doc this morning. Thorne has full strategy rights on the next 2 system builds. Melody just nodded. We'll do it right this time. No panic, Camille replied. Just precision. They said goodbye, with no need for small talk. As the sun dipped below the skyline, Melody moved to her desk by the window. The city outside was buzzing, alive with new stories, new players, new deals being drafted by people who still thought the loudest voice in the room always wins. She knew better now. She didn't need noise. She just needed her name. On the page, on the clause, on the structure. And that was enough. Because silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes, it's the space where the real work happens, where power shifts, where foundations move, where a woman no one expected rewrites everything, quietly, completely, and under no one's banner but her own. And if you've ever been talked over, erased, or underestimated, know this. You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to outlast the noise. Sometimes the loudest revenge is survival with your name intact. If Melody's story moved you, share your thoughts below, your silence-breaking moment, your quiet victories. And if you're ready for more stories of justice, power, and reinvention, hit that subscribe button. We'll build something stronger together.